Have you ever had that eerie feeling that reality isn't quite what it seems? That perhaps the world around you is just a thin veil, hiding something far more sinister beneath? I never used to think that way, but after what happened in that house, I'm not sure I'll ever see the world the same way again. It all started on a crisp autumn evening. My best friend Jake had recently inherited an old Victorian mansion from a great-uncle he'd never even met. Excited by the prospect of a free weekend getaway, he invited a group of us to check it out. There were 6 of us in total: Jake and his girlfriend Mia, our mutual friends Ethan and Olivia, my girlfriend Sarah, and me, Henry. As we drove up the winding, tree-lined driveway, I felt a sense of unease creeping over me. The house loomed before us, a decaying monstrosity of Gothic architecture, paint peeled from its weathered boards, and tangles of overgrown vines seemed to clog the walls, as if nature itself was trying to reclaim the land. "Looks like something out of a horror movie," Sarah murmured, squeezing my hand. I forced a laugh. Good thing we don't believe in ghosts, right? If only I'd known then how wrong I was. The first few hours were uneventful enough. We explored the house, marveling at the antique furniture and dusty old paintings. The place was a treasure trove of Victorian-era artifacts, from ornate candlesticks to a massive library filled with leather-bound tomes. It was in that library that we found the first clue that something wasn't quite right. Ethan, always the history buff, had pulled out a faded journal from one of the shelves. As he flipped through it, his face grew pale. "Guys, you need to see this," he called out. We gathered around as he showed us the journal's contents. It belonged to the original owner of the house, a man named Ezra Blackwood. The entries started out normal enough, detailing the construction of the house and Ezra's life with his wife and children, but as we read on, the writings became increasingly disturbing. Ezra wrote about experiments with time and space, of rituals performed in the dead of night. He claimed to have discovered a way to bend reality itself, to create pockets of time that existed outside of our normal world. "This is crazy," Jake said, shaking his head. The old man must have been losing it. But even as he spoke, I noticed something odd. The grandfather clock in the corner of the library seemed to be ticking backward. I blinked, and the second hand was moving normally again. Had I imagined it? As night fell, strange occurrences began to multiply. Lights flickered constantly, and we all swore we could hear footsteps and whispers coming from empty rooms. Objects would move when no one was looking, and more than once, I caught glimpses of shadowy figures darting just out of sight. We huddled together in the living room, trying to laugh off our fears, but I could see the growing unease in everyone's eyes. That's when it happened. The grandfather clock in the corner struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the house like a death knell. And suddenly, everything changed. The room started to spin, colors blending together in a nauseating whirl. I felt like I was falling, tumbling through space and time. When the world finally stopped moving, I found myself alone in a dark, unfamiliar room. Confused and disoriented, I stumbled towards what I thought was the door, but as I reached for the handle, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. Looking down, I saw a knife protruding from my heart, blood seeping through my shirt. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The world faded to black, and I thought for sure I was dying. But then I woke up. I was back in the living room, surrounded by my friends. The grandfather clock showed 11:59 p.m. Had it all been a nightmare? Before I could even process what had happened, the clock struck midnight again, and once more, the world began to spin. This time, I found myself in the attic. A noose dangled in front of me, and to my horror, I felt my body moving against my will. I tried to fight it, but it was useless. The rope tightened around my neck, and I felt myself choking, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Again, darkness, and again, I woke up in the living room, moments before midnight. With each chime of the clock, I died in a new and terrifying way, drowning in the bathtub, falling down the stairs and breaking my neck, burning alive in a sudden, inexplicable fire. And every time, I'd wake up back in that living room, my friends oblivious to the horrors I'd just experienced. I tried to warn them, to tell them we needed to leave, but they couldn't hear me. It was like I was trapped behind an invisible wall, forced to watch as they, too, began to experience their own loops of death. Jake was the first to realize something was wrong. I saw the recognition in his eyes as he woke up from his first death, but before we could communicate, the clock struck midnight again, and we were torn apart. As the nights, or was it just one endless night, wore on, we all became aware of our shared nightmare. We tried everything we could think of to escape. We attempted to leave the house, only to find ourselves transported back inside the moment we crossed the threshold. We tried to destroy the clock, but it always reappeared, unscathed. It became clear that the only way out was to solve the mystery of the house itself. Why were we trapped here? What did it want from us? Between deaths, we scoured the house for clues. Old newspapers, family photographs, and dusty journals began to paint a picture of the house's dark history. We learned that Ezra Blackwood hadn't just been a madman scribbling nonsense in his journal. He had actually succeeded in his experiments, but at a terrible cost. His wife and children had been the first victims of the time loop, trapped in an endless cycle of death and rebirth. But there was more to the story. As we delved deeper into the house's secrets, we discovered hidden rooms and passages that seemed to defy the laws of physics. One door would open into a room that couldn't possibly fit within the house's dimensions. Another led to a hallway that seemed to stretch on forever, no matter how long we walked. In one of these impossible spaces, we found a room filled with mirrors, but these weren't ordinary mirrors. Each one showed a different scene, a different time. In one, I saw myself as a child, playing in a backyard I barely remembered. In another, I saw an old man who looked like me, lying on his deathbed. And in one mirror, I saw something that chilled me to my core. It was us, all 6 of us, standing in that very room. But we looked wrong. Our eyes were black voids, and our skin was pale and translucent, as if we were no longer quite human. As we continued to die and reset, we began to notice changes in ourselves. Sometimes, we'd wake up with memories that weren't our own. Olivia suddenly knew how to speak fluent Latin. Ethan could play the piano like a virtuoso, despite never having taken a lesson in his life. And me? I started to see things, glimpses of other realities, other timelines. Sometimes, just for a moment, I could see through the walls of the house, into a swirling vortex of time and space that hurt my mind to look at. We also began to encounter other entities trapped in the house. Some were clearly once human, but had been twisted by their time in the loop. They attacked us on sight, forcing us to defend ourselves or die trying, only to wake up and face them again. Other beings were something else entirely, creatures of shadow and mist that could pass through walls and possess our bodies, beings of pure energy that spoke directly into our minds, offering bargains and secrets in exchange for our cooperation. And always, there was the sense that we were being watched, that something ancient and powerful was observing our struggles, perhaps even orchestrating them. As we pieced together more of the puzzle, we realized that Ezra hadn't just trapped himself and his family in the house. He had created a nexus point, a place where multiple timelines and realities intersected. The house existed in a state of quantum flux, simultaneously in many times and places at once. We weren't just trying to escape a haunted house, we were trying to escape from outside of reality itself. The key to breaking the cycle, we discovered, lay in Ezra's final ritual. We needed to recreate it, but with a twist. Instead of trying to control time, we had to find a way to release it. But the house, or whatever force now controlled it, wasn't going to make it easy for us. With each attempt to perform the ritual, our deaths became more elaborate, more painful. It was as if the house was trying to break our will, to make us give up and accept our fate as part of its eternal torment. I watched my friends die in ways that will haunt me forever. Sarah, impaled on a chandelier that came crashing down from the ceiling. Ethan, torn apart by invisible forces that ripped through the air like razor-sharp claws. Olivia, swallowed up by the floorboards that turned to quicksand beneath her feet. And still, we pressed on. We had to. It was our only hope of escape. But as we got closer to our goal, things took an even stranger turn. We began to encounter versions of ourselves from other loops, other timelines. Some tried to help us, sharing information they'd learned. Others attacked us, convinced that only one version of each of us could escape. I found myself in the surreal position of fighting alongside one version of Sarah against another version of myself. The lines between friend and foe, between self and other, became hopelessly blurred. And then came the biggest twist of all. As we prepared for our final attempt at the ritual, I made a discovery that shook me to my core. Hidden away in a secret compartment, I found a letter addressed to me. It was in my own handwriting. With trembling hands, I read the letter. It was from a future version of myself, one who had apparently escaped the house only to be drawn back in. He warned of a terrible truth. The house was not the true enemy. It was a prison, yes, but one designed to protect the outside world. What Ezra Blackwood had actually discovered was a way to summon and bind an eldritch horror, a being of such cosmic power that its mere presence threatened to unravel the fabric of reality. The time loops, the deaths, even the house itself, all of it was a complex containment system, powered by our fear and suffering. If we broke the cycle and escaped, we would be releasing something far worse than we could imagine. I didn't know what to do. Should I show the letter to the others? Should we abort our escape attempt? Or was this just another trick of the house, a final effort to keep us trapped? In the end, I made a choice. I burned the letter and said nothing to my friends. We had come too far, suffered too much, to give up now. Whatever awaited us outside the house, we would face it together. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of suffering, we managed to gather all the necessary components for the ritual, ancient symbols drawn in our own blood, candles made from human fat. I don't want to remember how we obtained those, incantations in a language none of us understood, but which we had painstakingly memorized from Ezra's journals. As the grandfather clock began to chime midnight once more, we started the ritual. The air crackled with energy, and I could feel the house fighting against us with every fiber of its being. One by one, my friends fell. Jake, consumed by shadows that poured from his mouth and eyes. Mia, her skin peeling away like paper in a fire. But they didn't disappear this time. Their bodies remained, a grim reminder of what was at stake. I was the last one standing, the final words of the incantation on my lips. The house shook, pictures flying off the walls, furniture splintering around me. I could hear Ezra's voice in my head, screaming at me to stop, pleading with me to understand the consequences of what I was doing. For a moment, I hesitated. What if the letter had been telling the truth? What if we were about to unleash something terrible upon the world? But then I thought of my friends, of all we'd been through, and I finished the ritual. There was a moment of absolute silence, then, a deafening roar as reality itself seemed to tear apart. I felt myself falling, tumbling through nothingness. Images flashed before my eyes, every death I'd experienced, every horror I'd witnessed, but also moments of my life before the house, memories I'd almost forgotten in the endless cycle of terror. And then, I woke up. I was lying on the ground outside the house, my friends sprawled around me. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the scene. The house itself was gone, leaving behind nothing but a vacant lot overgrown with weeds. We all stared at each other in disbelief, hardly daring to hope that it was really over. Slowly, tentatively, we began to laugh. We were alive. We were free. But as we drove away from that empty lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us out of that nightmare. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of a shadow that shouldn't be there, and every night, just before midnight, I find myself holding my breath, waiting for the chimes of a clock that no longer exists. We may have escaped the house, but I fear its horrors will never truly leave us, and sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder, did we really break the cycle? Or are we just in a larger loop, one that we haven't recognized yet? Even worse, I can't stop thinking about that letter, about the warning from my future self. What if we did something terrible by escaping? What if our freedom came at a cost we can't even comprehend? Strange things have been happening since we left the house. Time seems to move differently now, speeding up and slowing down at random. People around us sometimes flicker, as if they're not quite real, and the news is full of reports of bizarre phenomena around the world, unexplained disappearances, impossible weather patterns, sightings of creatures that shouldn't exist. Did we save ourselves only to doom the rest of the world? I've tried to talk to the others about it, but they either don't believe me or don't want to think about it. They're so relieved to be free that they can't face the possibility that our nightmare might not be over. But I know the truth. I can feel it in my bones. Whatever was trapped in that house, whatever Ezra Blackwood sought to contain with his mad experiments, it's out now, and it's growing stronger every day. I spend my nights poring over occult books, searching for any information that might help us fight this thing. I've reached out to experts in paranormal phenomena, to physicists studying quantum mechanics, even to mental health professionals, because there's always the chance that I'm simply losing my mind. And all the while, I can't shake the feeling that we're running out of time, that the boundaries between realities are growing thinner, that the walls of our world are beginning to crack. So let me ask you one last time, have you ever had that eerie feeling that reality isn't quite what it seems? Because I have, and I'm terrified that soon, everyone else will too. The true horror, I've realized, isn't being trapped in a haunted house or even dying over and over again. It's the knowledge that our actions, no matter how well-intentioned, might have consequences beyond our comprehension, that in trying to save ourselves, we may have damned everything and everyone else. And the most chilling thought of all? This might be exactly what was supposed to happen. Perhaps we were never meant to escape the house. Perhaps we were always destined to be the ones who brought about the end of everything. As I sit here, writing this account of our experiences, I can't help but wonder, who are you, reader? Are you someone from my world, someone I might warn about what's coming? Or are you something else entirely, some being from beyond the veil, reading this as a historical account of how it all began? Either way, I leave you with this final warning: beware of old houses that seem too good to be true, beware of mirrors that show more than they should, and above all, beware the chiming of clocks at midnight, because you never know when that chime might be the beginning of your own personal eternity of horrors. And if you ever find yourself trapped in a loop of death and rebirth, remember this: sometimes, the prison is there to protect you. Sometimes, escape is the last thing you should be trying to do. But of course, by the time you realize that, it might already be too late. Don't forget to hit the like button, share with fellow horror fans, and subscribe for more spine-chilling stories.